Hello everyone, it's Tuesday, which means it's time for a podcast. We're joined, as usual, with Lyft. Hello, Lyft.
Hello, Aenimus.
And our special guest, CDM. Hi there, CDM.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, no problem.
CDM, how did you first discover Kingdom of Loathing?
See, it was 2005 or so, and I had been previously super addicted to Diablo 2, grinding. I think it was Diablo, it must have been 2, grinding a whole bunch with some clan mates, and then my children were born, who are now, 14, 15. I mean, it's 2005, so I can't do math. But they were born, and I needed to find a game that did not involve real time being at a computer with a mouse and keyboard. And someone was like, "Hey, you should try this Kingdom of Loathing thing." And it turns out that I could play while rocking a baby to sleep with one hand, or I could stop at any time when a baby was crying or whatever. So yeah, that's how I got sucked in. The coffee break nature as it was, which quickly turned into taking way more than a coffee break to play when I started getting into speed ascension and all that. But that was the start.
All I could think of when you were talking about how you couldn't remember how old your children were is Homer when he's doing his tax returns and he has to guess how many children he's got, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know, 9." Anyway, so interesting. You were actually a player before you joined Asymmetric. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, how did that transition happen?
I played for, I don't know, quite a few years. Like, if you look in the Ascension leaderboard before NS13, like some of the hardcore booze or hardcore Oxy boards, I was on some of those, and I did some one-day runs before everyone in the world had done them. And I eventually met some, I don't remember the exact order. I think I met some players, Warehouse 23 players, or ended up in, Hogs of Destiny. I started in the Hogs of Destiny, and I forget who, I met someone who was on the dev team, and then eventually they recommended me for the dev team, so then I met everyone who's on the dev team, and obviously Jick and Hot Stuff and Riff and Scully at that point, and then I joined Warehouse 23 and got to know everyone there a lot better. And at some point, it started because the forums, every time you clicked on the forums, it would take minutes to load at some point. Jick and Xenophobe at that point couldn't figure out why. I think I made some suggestions in dev like, hey, have you made sure that the PHP opcode cache is installed on that server, or checked, if the SQL queries are using indexes? And at some point, Zach was like, hey, Chris, you want to look at that for us? And then maybe a year and a half later, like, I just contracted, I spent 4 hours on that, and they sent me a check. And then a year and a half later, Xenophobe was moving on, and Zach was like, hey, you want to talk on the phone about some stuff? And called me, and the rest is history.
How does new content development work among asymmetric members, particularly that which the slash devs they don't see?
It really varies. Jick, myself, Hot Stuff, and Riff, we have a conference call once a week. We're normally on the phone for like an hour or so, which is where we do a lot of brainstorming. So it'll be, hey, we need an item of the month for September. So we'll do some brainstorming. Hot Stuff will make some sort of very corny pun, which then half the time will become the item of the month. Or, Riff will be like, hey, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, some sort of version of where's the egg, or whatever the genesis for that, the detective thing is. So that we'll brainstorm that, and then normally one of the four of us will then take that and run with it and write up something. Sometimes if it's me or Jick, it might be writing something that's actually like making some of the zones and writing some of the code. Or Riff or Hot Stuff will even spindle a vast majority of like the pieces. Or sometimes it's actually just a Google Doc that's like, hey, this item is going to be this, it's going to do this, here's the other things involved. So from there, one of us will take that and make all the actual items and zones and choice adventures and and that kind of stuff. Zach or I will wire up any code that needs to happen for that, and then essentially we'll put in those little tags that you will sometimes, I'm sure not very often, actually probably very often, see in the code that says like riff colon, write something funny here, or Zach colon, draw some art for this that should look like a flying saucer. And so those all show up like when you log into KOL. For us, those just show up as notes like, hey, Chris, do this, or Zach, do this. And then around then is when we try and get the player devs to look at it. And yeah, that's the basic process.
Thank you.
I mean, sometimes if we're inspired, it's just like some of the event stuff, like back the Eldritch invasion. That was just like, hey guys, this is live. I had an idea. Really, everyone on staff, if there's something that they want to do that they feel passionate about, or they like some item they want to throw in, like there's no form you fill out or approval process. If you're like, I really want to make this item, or when Zach's like, hey, I'm just going to make this random item and throw it in my store.
Well, Aenimus told me that I could only have one of my own questions, so I made it huge. We, the public, understand that Asymmetric want to lower the power level of items of the month compared to, let's say, previous years. However, in doing so, and this is not an attack, this is just personal observation by me, it would appear that there are fewer interesting or novel mechanics like Space Jellyfish or Cramco or the Diabolic Pizza. And something that just happened recently, we had a lovely interaction between the camel and a yellow ray. That's something that I especially enjoy, and I like to see more of that. And it's what initially attracted me to the game in the first place. So again, this is not a personal criticism, but there are some, maybe me, that fear for what standard will look like next year, especially what the standard will look like 1 year after that. So in summary, do you think Asymmetric has found like a sweet spot for like power and this is cool? And could we expect more novel interactions and mechanics in future items of the month?
It's funny. Every month we talk about, well, how's this item going to be different, or what's going to be novel about that? And I think seriously, but also jokingly, is the realization that basically every time we try to make something that is intended to be interesting in that way, it falls flat, and the things that are interesting are all happy accidents, right? It's like the most recently, like the ion stones. No, what are the ionian? How do you say that in Spanish?
Well, I was hoping to ask you that. I'm just going to call it the crown.
Right. So the idea was like, oh, this will force people to do some pathing by going to different zones that they might not normally do to boost the crown, right? But there's always this knife's edge, right? Because it's basically everything is either optimal or it's not, right? You can talk about degrees of optimality, but really it's either optimal or it's not. And if it is, then it's just a question of how much better is it than the last thing. And holy crap, it's way too much better. This is the only thing that you're ever going to use for the rest of your life as a hat for 3 years. So I think, right, we're always trying to skate that edge of making it good enough to be used, but not good enough to be the only thing that's ever used in that slot. It's a long way of saying, the goal is always to have things be fun and interesting and impact runs. I think, like, as a general principle, the goals for items of the month or any content is to let's stay with items of the month.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to be useful in an Ascension context, fun or interesting for somebody who doesn't really care, who's just like, hey, I want to donate $10 and I like just playing this game because it's funny. Which, right, there's a good portion of those. Those are the two main things, right? Is that there should be some interesting to someone who cares about power in some degree, right? So that's not necessarily always speed ascension, right? Sometimes there's some things where we know the hook is going to be PvP or aftercore or ascension. I think that this year, obviously trying to tone down the power a little bit, it's harder to skate that edge when you're erring towards the side of not being broken. And it's also, right, it's not a secret that we've been doing this for a long time. So there's a lot of things to think of. Hey, we should do an item that lets you get an effect through. We did that. The genie does.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of those novel mechanics. They've been done, right?
I had an analogy. If you owned a go-kart track and you wanted people's lap times to take longer, you might have two options. You could make the course take longer or add extra obstacles that would slow them down, or you could just gut the car, put in a really small engine, and they would both achieve the goal, but maybe one method is more preferable to the people actually driving the go-karts in this case.
Yeah, which one is it though?
Well, for me, I would like more obstacles, but maybe other people would feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, because you think about that metaphor. What are those obstacles? Are they adding are they adding more content required to ascend? I don't know. What are the obstacles in that metaphor?
But thank you for your thoughts on that.
So regarding working at Asymmetric CDM, do you also have a hand in the next West of Loathing game? Let's call it West of Loathing 2. Do you have a hand in that as well?
I mean, sort of like West of Loathing, my primary role is almost done at this point. We do a lot of the development in some web-based tools, so I built those, and we did some exciting from Zach and the other guy's point of view updates to add like syntax highlighting, and you can hit Control S to save while you're editing the script and stuff like that. But for the most part, that's done. I mean, probably what will happen is similar to what happened near the end of West of Loathing development, is that Riff and Hot Stuff and Zach will disappear into a finishing the game hole for the other content, and I'll take point on a couple of months of items of the month or whatever, which will be my main role to get the other game out. Will be making sure that KOL doesn't go away. So if you like the Time Spinner or the Genie or the Saber, so you can look forward to more weird, probably broken things in that time period, and a couple of months when we're really gearing up on the next game development.
Excellent. Sorry, that last question was from Ari Makey. Whack asks, as a coding wizard, what was your most powerful and forbidden magical spell? And Lyft adds, and why was it used on your Jimbo's Law?
The most powerful and forbidden I mean, in both PHP and JavaScript, where I spend most of my time, it's got to be the eval function, which is incredibly dangerous and prone to breaking things, but also how half of KOL works. Which, if you're not familiar, is basically a way to store code outside of the code, pull it in, and run it, which is what makes us able to develop a lot of KOL content quickly. Is that the code is in a database somewhere, but also if you go on the internet and you're like, hey, how should I evaluate this code? And you go on Stack Overflow, the first answer will probably be like, don't do that. That's dangerous. So that would be probably my most dangerous and powerful spell.
How has it been working for the team at Asymmetric in terms of balancing time and effort between KOL and the next West of Loathing engine game?
I think we have done a good and bad job at different points. And I think that's just everything ebbs and flows. Jick talks a lot about just the idea of like creative juice, right? Like anyone could sit down at their computer and I think work for 100 hours in a week if they wanted to. But I think with creative work, a lot of the actual work doesn't happen when you're sitting down at your computer or sitting down at the light board or whatever to draw. It's that, hey, I have this idea for like the drip, right? I don't think most of the work for developing the drip happens when Zach sits down and adds some things to the spindlers and write some code and draw stuff. It's that background process of he's eating dinner and he's like, oh, what if this interacted like that? So I think that at different times that juice gets applied to either another project or to KOL. I think because we're a team of 4, we don't do the best job of balancing that just because of the reality of either the other projects take forever or never get finished, which is what part of, I think, what my role was near the end of West of Loathing development was to focus on KOL so that everybody else could not. Which I think also probably ends up being a good thing because then you get a slightly different flavor to those items of the month that come out or the challenge path, like the license to adventure, right? That was basically I had the creative juice at that point to make a challenge path, and I essentially did it 60% on my own, and then assigned a bunch of stuff like, hey Riff, when you have some juice, write this, or Zach, draw these strange things that I've described for you. Which I think is actually what gives KOL some of its long-term value. Like there's things that you can go in there and that Scully wrote this or Riff wrote this or
Right.
CDM or Zach wrote that. And I think that to some extent, I think it's a benefit that those juices ebb and flow.
We forgot to preface these questions that some questions have been paraphrased, and some names of the people asking the questions have been changed to protect children, the easily offended, and easily offended children.
Thank you for the disclaimer. 3 Bullet Hamburglar asks, which mechanics implementation are you most proud of?
So like on the back end, some of the best things mechanically that we did were make it so that everything could give you the benefits that enchantments do, like pieces of gear or skills or whatever. Like everything can use kind of in some sense this RPN notation that Xenophobe developed a decade ago, but only applied to enchantments, where it basically be like player strength plus equals 10. And for the longest time, that was only enchantments, but we made it so that could work on equipment and that could work on intrinsics, and I guess there's not really a lot of other places. That has made it so that things can be a lot more diverse in the game. The actual mechanic, I really still like the genie. I just feel like that was fun to develop.
It was fun to play with.
That's good. That's good when those things align.
That was the item of the month that was in the store when I first joined.
Captain Scott says, and this is paraphrased, I'm not going to say paraphrase anymore, otherwise I'll be saying it all the time. What's the newest with the RNG issues? That is like the monster modifier things. And if you can tell us what's been changed so far, and is it over? I think the answer to that last part is kind of over, but also not really, and it's hard to say.
We had this on one of our conference calls. We talked about that. Honestly, we don't really know what the deal is. And B, I tried a bunch of stuff. I actually just pushed something out this morning, but because it's all live and it's so far impossible to necessarily reproduce, was like the most frustrating part was like, let's change these 3 things because we want to try and fix it because it's important. But also, there's no way to like do this scientifically, so that we're ever going to really know what the actual issue was. We found some hits on the internet where people using our version of PHP said, "Yeah, this started happening to me," and then nobody was able to solve it. So
That's wild.
I don't really have a good answer to that. That's one of the strangest, most frustrating, because it's just normally when there's like, oh, this weird thing happens when I do this. It's it's normally pretty easy and KO to figure out like, oh, okay, that's because you've got the snow globe and there's this random thing happening at the end. Okay, that's why this chunk of code runs. Where this is 10 different things that now use 2 different methods of determining random numbers acting predictably sometimes. So so maybe somebody out there has a super cool exploit, and if you know how you're able to recreate it, let us know.
Dragonlord123 asks, how many times, if any, are challenge paths play tested before they come out? I feel like that's probably more of a question for me, but I guess...
Yeah, what's your answer?
As much as possible with people on the player, because I mean, I guess what happens is that CDM or Jake or whoever write the path or write the code for the path, and then we try to, hopefully it doesn't break, but we try to break it, and then you fix it, and we do that as much as we can before the path needs to be released to the public, I suppose.
Yeah, it really depends how far ahead of time does the path actually get done, which is anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. Am I being too? I'm sure that's been true. Yeah, but I mean, honestly, the answer is probably across all paths, somewhere between 0 and 100 times. On average, someone on the dev team will manage to run through most of an Ascension, but not always.
Katharine asks, relatedly, latency in KOL has improved. Some boards were removed or updated less often, like the Ascension or Detective ones. Is there a list of all the things that were changed? And did it have anything to do with Ezendor's Ascension history or Yojimbo's Law profile?
Not specifically. I mean, yeah, the big thing was it's funny to talk about latency today, which if anyone who remembers 2007, 8, before the new servers previous to the current servers, it would be then it was exacerbated because you were taking 28 to 30 rounds for every fight because you were doing stasis to fuel your bugbear shaman. So it would be like 5 minutes to play 1 round of combat because every click would take 22 seconds. I don't know if anybody out there, anyone else is old and dumb enough to remember doing that like I did, which luckily there's KOL Mafia or JavaScript user scripts and back in the day. But I mean, honestly, so we started seeing some weird behavior, which was only explainable through database latency. So just like everything else, it kind of ebbs and flows because we're a small team. We don't have a person who can say your job is to monitor the database and performance and optimize things all the time. So it's kind of like, oh, things have gotten a little slow. Let's turn on some logging and look and see what database queries are taking a long time, what pages are taking a long time. And really, it was like, oh, at the 31 minutes or whatever it is past the hour, there was definitely something. And the query, was it drunkest? Is that what it was? The most drunk player had to hit, basically to find out who is currently the most drunk, needs to look at every row of the player table, which there's too many players and too many people online for that to ever be fast. So just the person who was most drunk yesterday looks at a copy of that table from it rollover, so that's quick. But the person who's currently drunk, the way things currently work, requires looking at the table that has everything else, like how many hit points do you currently have, that gets updated every time a round of a fight happens. So it was just super expensive.
Just because you mentioned Mafia there, I'm going to slip in Gauzy's question, which is, how familiar do you keep yourself with the development of Mafia, and what do you think of it from your perspective when writing the output it consumes?
I mean, I used to use a lot of Mafia. At different points of time, different active Mafia devs have been on the dev team, as well as there's always people, the player dev team that use Mafia and let us know when something broke. I mean, as far as how much do we care or pay attention, like there are a lot of things in the HTML and the code which are explicitly there to make Mafia's life easier. Is It's never the first priority, right? The first priority is always to have it work for someone in a vanilla browser. And there's sometimes when I'll groan when it's like, oh, this feature makes it hard for Mafia, and I'll say, boo hoo. But I think in general, we understand that there's a lot of people that wouldn't play without Mafia because there are things that are very tedious in the vanilla game. And I think from the outset, the philosophy has been like it's totally okay if people make those things easier on themselves, and if we can, and it does not ruin the game otherwise, we're okay supporting that. There's a whole API that exists specifically for that.
You folks have been quite nice to Mafia lately, especially. So I think I'm happy. I think Gauzy's relatively happy. We have a PvP section now. Some questions related to PvP, and the amazing Mr. Toothpaste says that they want the totes to become a contagious virus again. Thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I should fix that. I have a chat command that can have me make someone be totes. I think it's called totes carrier. So that I forget how that works, but it probably means someone ascended or stopped playing who has it. Because in theory, whenever you, I forget, won or lost against someone who had it, it just moved that flag. So yeah, definitely, I will totes fix that.
The Erosion Seeker asks, when can we have new and different PvP seasons? Dieting season, vacation season, seasoning season.
PvP basically held me at gunpoint to say taco season.
Oh, taco season. Taco seasoning. Let's see. What month is it? It's August. This is the problem, is that I can never remember when the new season starts because I know that it's the first of every odd numbered month, and I have to recreate that from memory. I bet you next season will be unique.
Excellent.
Now that I've said it out loud.
That's probably the best answer we could have gotten. Aenimus asks, hardcore PvP is in a rough spot where there is hardly anyone doing it for one reason or another. Are some revamps feasible in the future to make it more attractive to people? Can we ever reach an equilibrium where it's attractive and it also represents what PvP is kind of meant to represent?
I mean, the short answer is I don't know that it will ever reach some sort of equilibrium where it let's say, essentially makes everyone happy. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that brings people out is unique rewards and unique seasons. So probably by having some cool, fun rewards to some unique season types, I bet we can get people to start playing again. Especially if it's always right. The reality is right that the carrot of PvP is, for some people it's bragging rights. It's the diamond goal of being on top of that leaderboard. I don't know that there's a lot of true clubby motivation to PvP and KOL because you can't really mess with people. I mean, you can, but not really in this day and age. And I think the other thing that the real carrot is that the rewards that people get each season. They hop in and play long enough to get those. And I think that the more exciting that is, the more likely there are going to be more targets, as it were, in a given season. But there's also the historically PvP rewards haven't been very or intentionally very Ascension relevant, just just because we understand that not everyone has time for every aspect of the game, and it would suck to be just focused on speed Ascension and have to PvP for a couple seasons to get the -2 turns book or whatever would be. I don't know that that balance is necessarily possible, but I think that in general, more people enter into a season when it's a unique, interesting season with a new reward. So probably scheduling that to happen more often is the main way to get more people involved or re-involved.
Miss Fishy asks, could the number one leaderboard person get a custom chat effect for the duration of the following season? An icon or something simple like that.
That's a cool idea. Similar to like I forget what happened. Like something happens when you're at the top of the hill, right? I don't even remember. I wrote this, how long? It wasn't even that long ago. But yeah, that's a cool idea and would be actually pretty easy. I'm going to write that down.
Excellent. Another suggestion I remember people passing around was that whoever's on top of the hill their name makes the announcements. Like it's Principal Maloney or something right now. Like whoever's on top of the hill makes those announcements instead would also be something the PvP folks said they'd like to see. Just food for thought, really.
That's interesting too. I guess those names get boring after a while. Yeah, that's cool.
And I have one last suggestion for PvP, which is like I'm just completely spitballing here, and I'm not expecting you to comment yes or no, but I was thinking that if every player had like a pretty flower garden, and to kind of have this kind of clubby aspect, you can stomp on 3 of your own flowers when you fight someone. So this would be actually a replacement for looting, because I feel like looting is things that some people love it and some people hate it, but I feel like the people who love it because it's clubby, and you could keep the kind of the ideology of clubbiness by having this garden. And if you stamp on 3 of your own flowers, let's say you get 100 flowers a day or something, you can stomp on 2 of your opponent's flowers rather than 1. So you hurt yourself more, but you hurt your opponent more. So it's like stabbing yourself twice to stab your opponent a little bit harder, as it were. And then somehow pretty flowers in this garden have some kind of effect on something. I don't know, rewards or swagger or something. I don't know. Just spitballing here.
Yeah, that's the real question. Is like, what do those flowers do? Because does anyone actually care about their pretty flower garden?
I'll think about it more, and then I'll bother you later on or something.
All right, that wraps up our PvP questions. Just Eyes asks, why is some stuff seeded, like meteors or affirmations, and then some stuff is just normal RNG, like the boxing daycare consumables or like the Pokegarden drops? Is there a method to how you pick which one's seeded versus just true RNG?
It generally ends up something like this, right? We're brainstorming an item of the month, and it's like, yeah, and each day you get like 5 random items, and okay, one of them does this, one of them does this. Oh, and one of them's like a double yellow ray, and we say, oh, yeah, you're going to be screwed in an Ascension run if you get 2 of those in a row, and somebody else gets the crappy item. So basically, the answer is those things get seeded when we design something and realize that the randomness is going to lead to some people feeling like they threw away their run because on days 1 and 2 they didn't get the good item, and that's why those end up getting seeded. Because we'd rather have it still feel random to your normal person, but also not screw over the person who actually cares and looked up like, what should the results be? Am I getting screwed if I don't get the cool item on day 2? Right? Because it's no fun to plan out a run and put a bunch of effort into it, and then day 2 you flip a coin and you get the crappy item instead of the good item, and you're like, well, I'm not going to make the leaderboard with this. And it tends to be the things where we think that's going to happen.
That kind of sounds like our astronomer situation right now, but that's a different topic.
So Mergen Doof is very upset that there is an unused duck.gif and would like to express that anguish, and that's it. So it's not really a question.
Wow.
Malibu Stacy asks, are there plans to tie up loose ends in events, such as the council has said they're going to do something about the tentacles for some number of years?
We were talking, Lyft. It's before you started, so is it 3 years now that the council is going to do something about those tentacles?
Whoa. Is it really? Tentacle. But didn't they already do something? Well, thanks for helping Killing out. What do they say? Yeah, I mean the short answer is I feel like every time we do some content in the future, be like, hey, is this a way to tie up that loose end? I guess I just don't I can't remember what specifically there is a loose end there, but
Our chat has said it always comes up first visit of the Ascension, and the line is, by the way, we're sick of all these disasters. Holes in the sky, tentacle beasts trying to eat our town. We're going to do something about this. You just wait.
oh, it actually comes out. Apparently it's supposed to happen 1 out of 5 times. I don't know what they were intending to do. Eventually, I'll think of that, and then that will totally get closed up. That hole.
And blow everyone's mind.
Yeah, it'll be amazing.
In the similar vein, again from Malibu and Mergendoof, is Dr. Stewart ever going to get his notes back from the reviewers? Dr. Stewart's the guy in the science tent. Is his research on refuse material ever going to go anywhere? Is Lyle actually ever going to continue construction on non-item of the month mails?
It's funny. Dr. Stewart has figured out how to do something with the refuse. Dr. Moyer has not figured out what kind of effects could be on the things that you make to make them not seem dumb. Yeah. So yeah, eventually, definitely. There's items created, and there's a bunch of code and some mechanisms to do some stuff with dirt and dust and what was the third thing? I forget, but rubble maybe.
I can hear people clamoring into mall buying all that up right now.
Volk asks, what's the deal with the Pokefam path? And why is it in this weird ever standard? And next year it won't even have its flavor item of the month, the Poke Garden. So are there any plans to address any of this?
I mean, the basic answer is because it lets you avoid every fight.
There were some very scary interactions that I think you handled. I'm not going to mention them just in case someone else finds something else, but there was very scary interactions that happened because of Pokefam.
Yeah, it's just generally because it's so different than everything else. We don't want to be committed for the rest of our lives to checking to make sure like every new item of the month and every new piece of content and everything does not break when you go into a poke fight instead of a regular fight. So do I think that will be changed? Probably not.
I think someone suggested why not have it in a fixed standard, like as in it is completely fixed between this time period to this time period. So then you don't ever have to deal with anything else.
Or just make a special exception for the garden.
Yeah, that seems. I mean, letting you use the garden like in that path seems probably like the right thing to do. And then, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that was the intention. Was that like the standard date should have stayed the same instead of moving? But I think that code is just wrong. So code that you write February of 2018 that's not going to have an effect until January of 2020 tends to be hard to test and also tends to often be buggy. Is the answer to that, because I think the intention was that the standard date was fixed at whatever it was when it was the current path, and that's probably just a bug.
Buster Rhymes asks, and this is only fair to ask because we asked Jake on the last one, who is your favourite chat person in dev, and why isn't it Aenimus?
I mean, it isn't Aenimus because he's the one who's making sure it gets done. So sometimes I log in and I'm like, oh, he's asking me about that thing I really should have done 3 days ago. Oh. On the other hand, that also is super useful. So any like things that seem dumb that get fixed but are actually super important to people that would listen to this podcast is because Aenimus has been like, CDM, Jake, could you fix this thing that I know you don't care about, please? And we're like, okay, fine, we'll fix it because we don't want to hear about it again. Which might sound begrudging, but really is half the value of having people on the dev team is be like, hey, remember you said this thing? Maybe you should do that. Okay.
You're a man after my own heart.
I mean, how about Werebear? I love Werebear because he's been around forever and he cracks me up because often he'll come on in like, the second of the month and be like, hey, is there an item of the month to test? And we'll say, yeah, we released it yesterday. And he'll be like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. um, but he's a fun guy who's been around forever, helping us out, and he just has a busy real life, and he's mainly just interested in collecting one of everything for Holder of Secrets. So that's fair.
Is that public information? Of course it is, but
I think everybody in the world has to know that if they care. Also, he's secretly Aenimus now.
Next question, 3-Bullet Hamburger asks, what is your favorite memory of KOL before you became a dev for it?
Oh, am I allowed to mention the very cute forum post you may or may not have deleted since?
I don't think I've deleted it.
Okay, well, if people want to go on CDM's profile on the forum and look at his post history and some of his very first posts are incredibly adorable. About what you're going to do with your very first Mr. A purchase, and you sounded very excited.
I mean, it was exciting. I mean, what was the item of the month at that time? Did I say?
Who knows? I think it was like 2004 or 5, so.
Yeah. My favorite memory of KOL is probably hitting leaderboards. Like I was super into playing the game Speed Ascension. I admittedly didn't have quite as much time, so I was doing hardcore booze runs, partly for those lead in booze for some 1-day attempts, but also because those leaderboards were softer, and I thought I could. I don't know if I ever got first place or not, but those were back in my day, stasising through 28 turns while farming the icy peak for stats with my pygmy bugbear shaman who was sucking up all my MP otherwise, using like a curd flinger as a turtle tamer so that I wouldn't actually hit because they kept fixing all the huggle bugs. Those were fun times.
George out of wedlock asks, I understand the reason for standard, but is there an item you were personally disappointed to see leave standard? For me, it would be the DNA gene splicing lab. It introduced some fun strategy options.
I mean, honestly, at this point in my life, generally when things leave standard that are exciting, it's an exciting positive thing because it's an opportunity to reuse part of that mechanic. Someone's like, oh, there's no longer a good garden in standard. Oh, I have an idea for the next item of the month. That honestly tends to be my reaction now to things going out of standard.
I think Power Glove's a really good example of that. The Powerful Glove it's got like the Macro Meteor on it, the second instance of Macro Meteor, and everyone loves that item.
Mergen Doof asks, how do you decide the auto sell prices for items?
Well, what I do is I tag it for hot stuff and say, hey, put in all the random numbers on this. And then he comes in and puts numbers on things. I honestly don't know. When I make an item and I fill out all those fields and stuff like that, I generally make it up. And it's somewhere between 50 and 500. Probably most things I've made auto sell for 100 meet because that seems like a nice round number. I mean, there's an exact science that we use. I can't reveal the formula, though.
Buster Rhymes asks, and this might not be your prerogative, but we're going to stick it in here anyway. Is the time twitching tower ever coming back, or is it gone for good? This is a serious question. I have hoped to one day adventure there, because I do believe it's been gone now for 4 years. I think I did bother you about it the other day. Maybe, I know this isn't really your decision as such.
I mean, I honestly think it will. I think it's just coming to the realization that it's more fun for it to come back, even if it doesn't involve a live Twitch event, right? Because it does kind of suck for that content to be hidden away forever when it was intended to be more evergreen. I probably won't make that decision, but it's definitely something more that I'll bring up on my next conference call with the team.
Would be appreciated.
Frederick asks, how consciously do you create useful softcore polls when making items of the month?
The goal is always for things to be useful in an Ascension run. I mean, not every single item, but that's generally a question. Like when we're say figuring out an item of the month or making a reward for something, the goal is for it to be useful to some type of player, right? And quite often that's an Ascender because that's the main goal we set out there, and also some of the more vocal crowd, so that especially for items of the month, the goal is always for them to be worth using. And then for things that are rewards or new things, new recipes, as infrequently as that happens these days, there's always some thought to like, hey, is this something someone would ever pull? It's tough because your pulls are so limited and there's a lot of powerful stuff out there. So it's always, is this going to be better than everything else? And if the answer is yes, then it also probably means, oh, the game's going to get a lot more powerful or faster. So it's a tough thing to actually do on purpose.
Frederick also asks, what's your favorite, and then in brackets, non-exploitive, unintended function people have eked out of a mechanic?
I don't even know if this is still the case, but the Eldritch stuff has been no end of amusing and also frustrating. Fighting infinite tentacles in a run or whatever, all that stuff. I mean, I honestly love that content because that was all pulled directly from my butt each night because I kind of backed. I mean, right, I just backed myself into a corner by like each day I'd be like, and tomorrow there'll be this new thing, and then I'd have a day to be like, okay, what's the reward for? Okay, you're gonna take these and you're gonna make these pizzas or whatever, which then comes to back to bite me in the butt 3 years later when it shows up in Shea Snooty as the cafe item, but like that, right? Like I feel like that was probably the first time in KOL we ever had a cutscene. The Hank tentacle or whatever. So that, or no, the giant monster. So like that has been both, a thorn in my side and also endearing to see that that stuff is still relevant.
It's a fascinating mechanic. I mean, it's really fun.
As a comment on that, do you think possibly in a future item of the month you could implement something similar to Eldritch attunement, that is like fighting tentacles after fights, but in a very controlled way that doesn't break A, hardcore, and B, doesn't break kind of the rest of the game in aftercore?
Thinking about it now, I would totally just set a flag for next fight should be against a thing and then delete that flag right away as opposed to the effect thing. But, you learn.
Oh, and Whack asks, what's your least favorite kind of thing that players have fuddled together to make into a mechanic? Is there anything that's particular? I guess you've already answered that with the frustration behind it as well with the Eldritch stuff.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I never really am upset when people figure out ingenious slash evil slash behind the scenes ways to use that stuff. I mean, I know at some points Jick has expressed frustration, like once people started to figure out how delay worked and then using things to abuse that and free runaways or whatever. But I mean, the Spady diamond inside of me is always like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like I don't know. Like sometimes, sure, it makes sense to patch those things so that you can't use them that way eventually. But I think discovering that new tech and then using it to get on top of a leaderboard is cool.
F. Slacker asks, also, with the perfectly fair coin being an untradeable challenge path reward, is there any intention of reintroducing this mechanic?
Just to add to that, is there any reason now that Genie's out of standard that we could just have that as a wish? Or as a wish that just gives you one turn of it?
Or use the science tent refuse for something like that?
It does have Ascension use, and I'm not trying to kind of cover that up. Like, if it weren't available in standard, honestly, it's just a way for people to spade things. Because the best way to spade is obviously with a perfectly fair coin. And if people weren't around during LAR, is it called, or whatever it was, they just cannot spade as effectively unless they go into that path. That's the main takeaway, anyway.
Huh. Interesting. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's too broken or of a pressure of mechanic to not come back in some form.
So we've probably got just a couple more questions before we'll let you go back into your Eldritch hole of whatever CDM. So Galsey asks, what's the thing you've most wanted to add to the game that has been vetoed by the rest of Asymmetric?
I don't think there's anything really. I mean, the thing that took the longest was I don't remember what, the cat burglar. Something like the cat burglar was an item of the month idea that I had probably pitched 8 years before it was implemented, and not because they were like, oh, that's a bad idea or that's stupid. It was literally just figuring out how could we make it work and make it so it was fun. Which I mean, I don't know if he succeeded on that or not, but yeah, I mean, as long as it's not like a fart joke or a dick joke, everything's pretty fair. Like we've parodied everything. I mean, obviously, everyone's sensibilities have evolved over time, but I don't know that there's anything really. I mean, what's the starfish? Did Riff used to talk about that on podcasts? Maybe I'm spoiling the starfish that farts into your mouth so you can breathe underwater. Is anyone? I feel like that's the crudest thing that gets brought up occasionally that doesn't exist because it's too crude. But
Buster Rhymes asks, so KOL was first a fun thing for you, and then it became a work thing for you. Is it still fun, or is it just work now, or have you got a good balance of fun and work?
it depends on the day. For the most part, I still enjoy it. I still have fun. Honestly, the most fun, I mean, going back was doing the tentacle invasion. Also super stressful. So there's a balance there. But yeah, I still enjoy it. I do not really play anymore. I don't even know if I had never gotten involved with development. I don't know that I'd still be playing a decade later anyways. I don't know that there's any games that, no. I mean, I still play Magic the Gathering 30 years later, but that might be the only game that I've gone back to for that long. So there are times that I wish that I was still interested in playing because it would be useful to be a little more in tune with the day-to-day playing, but I just also don't know that that's feasible, right? I don't know if you can be so inside of something for a decade and still want to log in and play 200 turns to reach the top of a leaderboard. I don't know.
And hopefully that's what the player devs are there for, to help give perspective.
Yeah, fresh blood.
Is there other projects you're kind of doing as well as KOL, perhaps in your free time or otherwise? And specifically, I guess, stuff that you'd want other people to know about? And if so, you can let us know and we can let people know about it.
Not really these days. I my main hobby is reading books. I used to send out a mailing list about that, but
Yeah, you had a
I've
blog and
been
everything.
too lazy. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the last
CDM.
post was 2013.
It was like CDM reads books so that you don't have to. But then I stopped writing. I kept reading them. I just stopped writing them.
DJVE asks, how has the move from a co-location facility to AWS, how has that affected the bottom line, deployment, and testing changes, as well as responsiveness of the gameplay?
I mean, it saved quite a bit initially. Colo was pretty pricey, but when we moved out, we also were able to architect things a little bit differently. Back in the day, if people could remember, when you would log in, you'd go to www.kingdomofloathing.com, you'd log in, and then you'd end up at like www.4.kingdomofloathing.com or www3. So one of the big things that we did is when we moved, that all runs through a load balancer now. So you might still be on individual servers, but those are all hidden behind a load balancer, which has actually let us at Crimbo or during the Eldritch event or uh, in March when COVID started, like when there's a bump in usage, we're actually just able to add web servers, and we just pay for them by the hour. So since we moved, we've had anywhere between like 3 and 7 web servers, which didn't involve going out and buying new hardware. So on it, that has been great. Performance wise, I think that had we bought a brand new database and all that, probably maybe the game might be a little more performant than running on the shared hardware we're on AWS. But as far as the management and the deployment, it used to be Jick's nightmare that a server would go down because it involved a drive and calling the facility and arranging a time. And he complained that he would always get sick after spending however long in their air conditioned room dealing with the server coming from his weak Phoenix constitution, I guess. So that the ability to just do it all virtually from Buffalo has been a revelation as far as the actual maintenance of the game. Like a server breaks and it's a click for me to fix it. And at this point, the web servers are not precious at all. I run a script and it adds a new web server, and so I would highly recommend it. I mean, if I was doing it all again today, maybe I wouldn't do AWS. We could save money by being on Linode or DigitalOcean or whatever. But AWS is what I personally know best or knew best. So that's what we went with, and it's been very nice.
Start rounding it off here, but so this is from a Waco. What's your biggest play design or coding regret regarding KOL?
There's what was the path where you were a zombie?
Zombie Slayer?
Zombie Slayer. Honestly, it was mainly me, but generally there's a lot of like places where you go to visit and like the content is different, like you go to visit a store and it's closed because of the apocalypse or whatever. Rather than making that a general system to let us update that content or change it for any path, a lot of it is just kind of hard coded into that script or like that specific shop or that specific NPC, which has A, caused a lot of bugs over time, and B, meant that that's not reusable, as opposed to like the council text. At one point we said, let's just make it so that you can easily replace all the council text, and it puts it into a place in the database where Riff or Zach can go in and just write new text based on the context of a path. And I wish we had done that generally for all the things that changed in Zombie Slayer, because I think you would have seen a lot of cool, funny, like I think one of the things about KOL that's fun is like when you're wearing like the V for Vivo mask, right? And you go to the council and they react slightly differently. Like just those like little interactions and setting us up to be able to make more of those in the future, I think would have been really valuable. I feel like there was a B there. Oh, and the B was that it also has created a lot of bugs by not doing that.
It's unfortunate that, what was the path? Exploding had really cool text, council text, like all written, but no one ever saw it because of some weird thing that it had to get ridden of for some reason. I forget why, but that's unfortunate.
Gossi asks, do you ever refactor old KOL code?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, maybe not all the time, but quite frequently. A lot of times things will get overhauled to work with a new mechanic, and then we'll just make it generic. Like the most recent case is anywhere where a familiar image used to be, it just used to pull out of the database the name of the picture and stick .gif at the end and display that. So when we did the left hand, what is that? Sinistral, whatever that thing is called.
Lefty,
yeah.
So that only, right, like you only see the cool image where it's like holding the thing or wearing the thing on its head in like the character pane and the top of the familiar page, because it was just hard coded in there because it's got to display a GIF and a PNG and position them. So when we did the camel and it has the multiple humps, we went back and changed everywhere where the familiar image is shown, and purposefully left no pick, which is the placeholder item image in there, so that Aenimus would tell us whenever it was still broken, and we could go back and fix everywhere to use the new system that, like, based on the type of familiar dynamic, generates the HTML for the image. So we'll do that, not all the time, but we're not afraid to go back and fix that kind of stuff. There are some things that are too big and large and ill-specified to really, like, it'd be tough to go in and change the way like a particular aspect of fight.php works, just because it's such a accumulation of features over decades. But we're generally not afraid to go in and change those things when it makes sense.
So shamelessly, to round it off, I'll ask, is there a non-zero chance that I can get a once per day skill to bestow 6.9 turns of best joke ever on someone?
Is there a non-zero? I mean, certainly there's a non-zero chance. I don't know that it's very high. I mean, first of all, we don't have fractional turns, and second of all, I'm not convinced that that really is the best joke ever. So I feel bad that about propagating that more. It feels like a lie.
It was worth a try. It's been absolutely amazing to have you here with us today, CDM. Thanks for your patience with the questions and answering the questions and coming onto the show, etc. And I guess your patience for dealing with me and Dev telling you to do things, I suppose.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was really fun to get to speak with you.
Yeah, no problem. I like talking about this stuff.
We hope we can have you back sometime in the future. And we're looking forward to your broken items of the month in the next 6 months.
Cool.
Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks again, CDM. Thanks, Lyft.